What up, my beautiful African family? This is your main man, Theo E.J. Wilson with African Diaspora News. And if you've been on the internet anytime in the last few days, you've likely seen our brother Mario, the R&B singer, Mr. You Should Let Me Love You, getting a little bit more love than he bargained for by getting groped by a woman in the front row. And looking at her hand, it appears that this woman was married. There's a large conversation that needs to be had about what happens when men endure what, if we put the shoe on the other foot, would be unconscionable if one gender did it to the other. But the fact is, this was sexual assault, 100% a Me Too scenario. But our brother Mario is a man, a black man in this country, and the conversations around what it means when men are violated, especially black men, against their will, regardless of their fame, status, fortune, or exposure, needs to be had because there's some ancestral trauma going on here. And this is a conversation that we're going to have to put our adult shoes on to have. We have to have a nuanced conversation about this. And I am asking for maturity right now, because that's not always granted on the internet, as we know. They say the internet is not the place for these nuanced conversations. But I know that my audience here at African Diaspora News can actually have this conversation like some grown-ups. So here's the clip, and then we're going to jump into this topic. There's been a crossfire of commentary about this incident, and I hear some people saying, look, man, it comes with the game, right? You want to be Mr. Sexy Flexy out there, then this is what happens, right? How long have we seen male stars, getting the adulation and adoration from female fans? And this is just what it showed up as right there, right? And the fact is that I've seen a lot of women riding for Mario. I've seen a lot of women standing up and be like, look, man, I wouldn't want this to happen to anybody, man, woman, or child, anybody. And I think that when we talk about why men are often sexually assaulted and never reported, there's a conversation that I need to bring up to you regarding my own personal experience. And I'm going to put a trigger warning here, right? Because a lot of times this stuff brings things up for folks. But in my own lived experience, I am a survivor now of a sexual assault at the hands of a woman. A woman. And the fact that the gender dynamics are what we at least feel are uncommon may not be as uncommon as we think, because the reason why I didn't report it is the same reason why many men don't report it. And so in telling this story, in my own personal experience, there are all the elements here that need to be talked about when it comes to men's experience surviving sexual assault. So if this is not a conversation that you want to have, this is the last trigger warning. And I'm about to get into how my experience was a microcosm of so many black men in this country. It has been 16 years for me since this assault. I was a young man. I was at a party with some coworkers of mine, and I ended up getting passed out drunk on the couch of somebody who was a lesbian. This sister was somebody who was in a partnership with another woman. And I woke up to the weight of her body on me. And as I was still tipsy, the room was spinning, and the sister began to get really, really aggressive with your boy. Now, there's a couple of things that happen here that I think a lot of men might experience, right? The fundamental fact of it is that this was not an encounter that I desired to have in any way, shape, or form. Now, I have to say that the sister, though she was considerably larger than me, was facially attractive. She's what somebody would call a, quote, pretty stud. And as the encounter began to escalate, I began to push sister off of me, but my body ended up saying something different than my words did. And I think we're adult enough to understand what that was. And I realized that if I was to get this sister off of me, I would literally have to physically assault her. I threatened that. And at that point, she said, if you do, I'm going to call the police. And which one of us do you think that they're going to believe? And then she asked about the physical evidence of me being turned on at that point, and things proceeded to where she ended up getting what she wanted. What I thought she wanted was simply a sexual encounter. It turns out that sister was after my DNA, and that she and her partner had basically sought me out to be the genetic donor to start their family. Once the encounter was over, I went through a myriad of reactions within myself trying to rationalize and justify what I had just experienced. And I think that a lot of men end up going through that. And I didn't tell anybody. The reason why I didn't tell anybody is because who would believe me? I'm a man. Now, one of the ways that I began to justify it was trying to figure out how to make it into a positive event, right? That's crazy. I was talking about it to myself, like, well, okay, well, I guess, she liked the way I look physically, taller than average guy. I guess I showed up with some intellect in the world, and she wanted to perpetuate that. But the rationalization soon fell apart when I started thinking about the fact that if the shoe was on the other foot, I would be going to jail, right? Now, fortunately, a child was not conceived from that encounter, but it led to another thing being conceived within my heart, which was a lot of negative behavior when it came to how I was dealing with women. A lot of it showed up as anger, hate, spitefulness. A lot of it showed up as me in the world with a chip on my shoulder when it came to women and women's issues. All right. And so it wasn't but maybe another decade before I actually sat down in front of a therapist and worked out what was going on within me. How do I justify showing up physically turned on in an encounter that I didn't want? Well, it turns out that this isn't just men, this is also women. This actually happens in more circumstances than we would know, right? And the fact that I am a man and that these things happen to us more frequently than is being discussed just put this Mario incident heavy on my heart to open up this discussion. Because what's interesting about this encounter is that if a sister was after my DNA, isn't that similar to what slave masters were after certain black men for? When we show up in the world with certain physical attributes, attributes that we were selected for from the continent and then bred for on the plantation, that is a form of an internalized stigma and oppression. That is a form of an internalized way of looking at black men generally that reduces us to simply bodies without being. Now, I hope we still have our adult shoes on as we move towards the end of this discussion. But I want to say, I was talking about this with my wife, who is, been long well aware of what happened to me in that encounter. And we were trying to decipher what is the root of this double standard. And it seems like the root of the double standard comes to the perceived danger and the actual danger when men commit sexual assault versus the danger when women commit sexual assault against men, right? Now, a lot of brothers, let's be honest, we so ready to get some action, we don't care how it shows up. Sometimes this feels like a compliment when a sister might overstep a boundary like that. But the fact is, we have to reckon with the fact that, encounters that are involuntarily sexual that happen between men and women happen, number one, far more often, and number two, are far more dangerous, generally speaking, in a physical sense, for sure, when it comes to what happens to women. And before I move on to what happens to men, I just want to say that through my therapy, I ended up moving from a chip on my shoulder about women's issues to understanding that no, 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 this is a gateway to compassion. I'm a double girl dad, and I got to make the world a better place for women when we're talking about how I show up in the world and how I make sure that my brotherhood shows up in the world when it comes to their boundaries with women. On the other hand, and I'm going to get to the men right now, what often makes men predatory is the fact that the toolkit available for men to talk about having been violated specifically by women is just not existent in our culture the way it is for when women are violated by men for obvious reasons. But if we don't talk about this, then what happens? Brothers suppress, they keep it inside. It comes out in all sorts of vile ways, especially if it happens when a man is underage. And so we as a culture, black folk I'm talking about, those of us who are the survivors and the descendants of the slavery experience, must begin to understand that sexual sovereignty is a thing that is going both ways. And I think that brothers need to understand that we have value as well. I think another thing that needs to be discussed is how when men encounter things like this, sometimes the scars are not physical. They show up psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. And the very fact that these can become generational curses that pass down your lineage, that become culturally accepted, actually endangers women too. Because if a dude has been preyed on in a way that makes him feel like the only way he can overcome that feeling of being preyed is to become a predator, now women are at risk, and the domino was started by a woman, right? And so, a lot of times, what is difficult for folks is that if they are from an oppressed class, they sometimes forget that they have the capacity to oppress, to be predators, to be violators of other people's rights, dignity, and sovereignty. And so I think that I've seen this discussion happening in the spaces of women. And I think that that discussion needs to continue. And, there's a whole nother discussion about why a married woman would even be reaching for Mario like that. But most importantly, our brother Mario is a human being, right? Black men who encounter sexual assault at the hands of sisters, still human beings, right? And if sisters who have been violated are not in touch with the capacity to be violators, they may continue a toxic cycle in our community that may show up like this or worse. And I want to say to my brothers out there, if you've encountered non consensual and negatively outcomed sexual encounters with women specifically, um, brother, don't internalize that. Seek the psychological counseling that you need to get back on your feet mentally and to re-achieve a state of equilibrium. Because it took me a decade to even be humble enough to even talk to a therapist about what happened. And in the wake of me dealing with the behaviors that I got trying to reconcile that, I left a whole lot of damage in my wake. So don't do that, brothers. Go ahead, step up to the plate, get you some help, and make sure that in that help, you understand that you're also helping your community. That's my thoughts on that. I'd love to hear yours below. My name is Theo E.J. Wilson with African Diaspora News. Go ahead and download our app. You can download our app at any app store, and it's just $9.99 a month, 13 cents a day. If you like what I'm saying and how I say it, go ahead and tune into my channel right here on YouTube, Theo Cyrus Rising. And I'll see you next time, where I saw you this time. Peace.